The next session, as you may recall, or in the last meeting that we had, Kim Cameron had come and gave you sort of an overview of our identity management strategies and was sort of going through some of the issues that that we were thinking about and some of the types of solutions that we were potentially working on. Due to feedback from a number of you individually and otherwise, you wanted to know more about some of the architectural things that were going on. So we decided at that point to bring the crew back to give sort of an update on where we were since the last time Kim and the identity management folks had come over and give you what the state of the art was, at least at that point, and to get a little bit more depth into some of the architectural details. So with that, I have asked Mike Jones. Some of you already know Mike Jones, but Mike is a director in the XML and Web Services Standards Group, and he used to be a researcher in the Systems and Architecture Group over in 112. And yeah, exactly. We sort of ping-pong back and forth between buildings around here. But he is an MSR alum, and so he's going to be talking for the first portion, doing more or less the updates since the last time we've talked. And then we're going to do a little bit of a context switch and bring on Stuart Kwan, who's a director in the Identity and Access group. I knew it was in there somehow. So what I'm going to ask you is 20-minute rule for both of these folks. First of all, 20 minutes for Mike. Let him get his act together, out and rolling, and then we'll do the context switch, and then Stuart gets his 20 as well. So with that, Mike, it's all yours.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be in front of you. I know many of you, as Dave was saying, from my years as a researcher, and I decided at the beginning of this year that I wanted to be doing a role where I had much more sort of external customer focused and people contact, and spent 2 months talking to the company to find what is the place I really am going to be the most valuable. And the role I'm in actually is promoting distributed systems, which is as much listening to people about distributed systems as it is talking to people about it. And in particular, a good bit of my time at the beginning of this, and what actually lured me into this role, was this little initiative called InfoCard, and some of the identity problems that it's going to solve. So the presentation that I'm going to give you today, I'll do in an abbreviated form. It's one that I've probably done literally 60 times or more for different audiences. I've been visiting major companies like banks and credit card companies. I've visited nearly all the top websites that you can think of. I've visited federal financial regulators. And Kim Cameron and I, Stuart Kwan and I, have been on this virtual roadshow trying to talk to people about what we think the identity problems are facing the network in general, and about a solution that we believe is the right way, not just for Microsoft, but for the whole industry to move forward and to tackle some of the problems that we can only solve together. And, you know, despite Dave giving me the politeness of the 20-minute rule, I'll take questions and I'll shut you down if I need to.
Be careful what you ask.
So, I mean, to this audience, I don't have to explain that the web is at an inflection point. It's both really valuable, and yet the people's trust of it is going down. There's Gartner surveys saying that actual online banking transactions have decreased. Not just the slope leveling off, they have decreased. And it has to do with trust. And most of the trust problems have to do with identity and security. So for purposes of this talk, we'll talk about identity in terms of a set of claims made about a subject. You know, when I get out my driver's license, it's an identity token. It makes claims about me in terms of my place of residence, sex, height, weight, types of vehicles I'm eligible to drive. They're attested to by the state of Washington. They may or may not be true. You may or may not choose to rely on them in any given context. But nonetheless, we're used to in this society and worldwide using claims-based identities. Because I'm in Seattle, I carry this other form of identity, which is a coffee card. It makes a different set of claims about me, which is that I've purchased 6 cups of coffee. If I would purchase another 4, it gives me the rights, or the bearer the rights, to another free cup. The point is here, different identities will make different sets of claims and are usable in different contexts. Let me go back to this point. It's very useful for at least our purposes to distinguish between profile information, which is, for instance, the information that Amazon keeps about me in terms of what books I've purchased, what I've looked at, versus my actual identity information. So identities work in context. You know, I can use my bank card at an ATM. I could use a government ID at a border. I could use this coffee card at a coffee stand. I can use MSN Passport accounts at Microsoft Properties for authentication. On the other hand, there's places where identities might work in context, or they might not, but you know, they're kind of weird. So for instance, I could use the Belgian EID card, this smart card. Conceivably, that could be made to work for all banking transactions for Belgian citizens in Europe. Again, for an American perspective, would I want the government knowing about all my banking transactions? Technically, yes. Sociologically, privacy-wise, probably not. And you know, when I was at CMU, they used my Social Security number as a student ID number. We understand the privacy implications of that now. I hear University of California did the same thing. And you know, guess what? Another thing that was sort of out of context, when we came up with, in the late 90s, this Microsoft Passport authentication system, we went out and evangelized it, and we made it possible to use it at places like eBay. Almost nobody used it there. The reasons for that were not technical. They were sociological and business reasons. And let me just go on to talk about that. In a sense, you can't be from Microsoft and talk about identity without sort of acknowledging Passport. So Passport was designed to solve 2 problems. It was designed to be an identity provider for the Microsoft properties. And it's a huge success at that. Oops. Maybe. There we go. I mean, we have 250 million active accounts. We do 1 billion authentications a day. What's not to like? Well, the people who thought of it also thought we would try to solve a bigger problem, which is to be a generally used identity provider for the internet worldwide. And it was wildly unsuccessful at that, and we got, you know, hammered on for that. The reasons for that, again, were business and social reasons. It had to do with the fact that people would ask the question, well, what role does Microsoft really, should it have in the relationship between a bank and its customer, or between Apple and its customers, or, you know, the government of France and its citizens? When people said, I'm not really comfortable with them being my identity provider, so they didn't use it. And so we've acknowledged this, tried to learn from it. We've tried to learn both from some successes and some failures, some of ours, some of others. And if you'll permit me, I want to spend maybe 5 of my minutes going through sort of a synopsis of what we think we've learned. Not just we, Microsoft, but we, the identity community. And I'm sorry that Kim Cameron isn't able to be here with you today as well, who's our chief identity architect. I know he spoke to many of you. And he's done just an amazing job pulling people together on his blog with a discussion about the question, if we were to have a widely adopted, long-lived identity solution, what properties would it have to have? And these are the answers that people everywhere from Linux people to Sun people to IBM people to international people all came up with.
It's not very orthogonal.
No, it's not. I'm sorry, Fred. I'm speaking extemporaneously. So, user control and consent, the first law. That's about that, information about a person should not be disclosed without that person's consent, and shouldn't be disclosed to parties that they're not aware of, and it should only be disclosed for purposes that they're aware of. This is not only a good idea, it's become the law in Europe, and it's becoming the law elsewhere. But even if it weren't the law, let's just step back. If we would build a system, or anybody would build a system that gave away your information, word would get out on the street saying, well, you know, this system, it, you know, publishes stuff about you. Do you really want to use it? It would get a bad reputation. It's a self-limiting property. So even if it weren't the law, it's the right thing. It's a good idea. Systems that have this property are going to be more widely adopted than those that don't. Law 2, minimal disclosure for a defined use. Stated positively, only the information that's necessary for an interaction should be provided for that interaction, and it should only be retained for the period that it's actually needed. So if I went to open a bank account and they started asking me questions that seemed irrelevant, like, what's the sex of my pets? I'd sort of scratch my head and say, well, what purpose do they have asking me that? Why do they need to know? And, you know, I'd probably choose another bank. That's an example of user pushback on a system that's requesting extraneous information. But there's an even deeper aspect of this. A lot of the, you know, recent news stories about information being leaked and, you know, the big credit card ones and whatnot, well, that's a problem with Law 2. These companies were retaining information that they didn't need, in fact, often illegally and in violation of contract, and it creates a liability. So there's an upside both to the consumer and to the information user that if you don't retain information, there's nothing to steal. It limits your liability. The law of justifiable parties is sort of where at least the second use of passport got in trouble. That law is about only those parties that need to be present in a transaction should be. People asked, why does Microsoft have to be part of the authentication exchange? We didn't. It was a violation of Law 3. Now, directional identity is a whole topic to itself, but let me try to do it justice in a minute or so. Along this axis, we believe that there's two kinds of identities in the world. There's public or omnidirectional identifiers. They have the property that you can refer other people to them. Everybody sees the same thing from all angles. You know, Carnegie Mellon University has a public identity. Microsoft has a public identity. You want people to be able to see the same thing. On the other hand, there's directional or private identities that we believe are more appropriate for people. They have the property that they are only visible to parties that the individual decides to make their identity visible to. And let me give you a visceral example of why this is important. I was recently dismayed to learn when I was talking to some legal experts from Harvard last week that the US government is still considering putting RFID chips in US passports. RFID chips are an omnidirectional identity that broadcasts identity information to all comers. The intended application of this is to make it a little bit faster to cross international borders, and that's, you know, arguably a commendable application. Another great application of that is that it becomes possible to build a device that in distances measured in the tens of meters detects the presence of US passports and triggers a large body of explosives. That's just as good an application of RFID in US passports as the intended application. Why is that possible? It's possible because RFID is an omnidirectional identifier. And, you know, I'm picking on RFID. Your Bluetooth phones, your 802.11 wireless cards, in the wireless industry, there's an awful lot of these. And again, there's a whole separate discussion that Kim is having with people in the wireless industry and with Microsoft and with other companies where there are solutions to these by revving standards. But I'll just say we believe that this is probably one of the challenges that's going to be facing us and we're going to have to solve. Pluralism of operators and technologies. a lot of well-intentioned people have come to us and said, why can't you just adopt system X? And why can't we all just agree on a single identity system and then the problem's solved? Well, let's do a thought experiment. Is there ever going to be a single system which is applicable in all identity contexts, which is future-proof, which can never be hacked, which will be adopted by Microsoft and Sun and IBM and the US government and the government of France and the government of China and the government of North Korea?
Well, I'd have said yes until you added France, but
Ain't going to happen. And even if you would get agreement, this pesky thing called innovation would happen. And pressure would build, oh, somebody had built a better system, and people would start to adopt the thing that wasn't the standard.
I think pluralism is, you made the case for pluralism.
Okay. So there will always be pluralism, both of operators and technologies. Human integration. We're really good as technologists at securing the connection, for instance, between Dave's laptop and a site that may be 5,000 miles away. But the bad things usually don't happen because somebody hacked into your SSL connection. The bad things happened because somebody managed to put something on your screen that tricked you or somebody into doing something that wasn't in their best interest. So a fundamental tenet of this work is, unless we can bring the user in as a functioning member of the system or a participant where they can make informed, rational choices on their own behalf, we haven't solved the problem. I mean, related to this, almost a corollary, is this law of consistent experience across contexts. People are really bad at handling complexity. If faced with, gazillions of different kinds of authentication and information disclosure interfaces, occasionally somebody will make the wrong choices. And occasionally doesn't have to be very big before there's ample opportunity for fraud and other bad things that we see happening. Why have I spent this time talking about this? The laws of identity really have helped to shape the dialogue in the last year in the identity community. You go to Digital ID World, you go to the Burton Group Catalyst Conference, you read people's blogs. It's really useful for evaluating, are we building the right kind of systems? And I'll say, as valuable as it is outside the company, it's also incredibly valuable inside Microsoft. And this has been presented all the way up to Bill Gates, and people say, yes, these are the right principles. Now when Kim is asked to evaluate somebody's project or product idea, he doesn't have to, from first principles, criticize their idea. He can say, well, you've got a great product idea, but you have a problem with justifiable parties, or you have a problem with minimal information disclosure. And he can nicely say, your product will be self-limiting if you don't, change your plans. And so it's been really helpful inside the company.
Is there a sense that there's only 7 laws?
There's no sense that this is a complete set. There's a set that we did get consensus out in the discussion that this is at least a minimal set. And in fact, there's been a lot of proposed, additions and thought. And it's a very healthy discussion that's going on to this day. Some in person, some on the net. So what conclusion do we reach from all of this? I mean, why did I spend so much time on pluralism, which you all understand? There's this paradox that to have a common solution, we still have to embrace the fact that there is pluralism. And yet we've faced other situations like that in the industry before. We believe that the solution is going to be to build what we call an identity metasystem, a system of systems, a system that uses the different identity systems that exist and will be invented to solve identity problems. And you probably get that from just these words, but when I explain it to most people, I use this analogy. People use another metasystem every day. I call it the network metasystem. In the late 70s and the early 80s, we spent a lot of time as an industry arguing about which local area network to use. If you were going to build an app, you had to know it was an Ethernet app or a token ring app or an ArcNet app or an X25 app. And you just couldn't build a program without knowing that sort of thing. And that's exactly where we are in identity today. You have to know you're building a Kerberos app, or you have to know that you're building an X509 app, or a Liberty app, or a SAML app, and you name it. What changed? We invented a network metasystem called the Internet Protocol that made it possible to use all of these individual systems without having to know the details of them. And in fact, it interconnected them and made them interoperable. There's another way that this analogy is really instructive. The network metasystem did not replace any of the individual systems. If anything, it made them more valuable. This identity metasystem that we're proposing makes, Kerberos and Liberty and X509 probably more valuable and uses them to do the work. So that's the whole premise of what this initiative is about. Let me just talk even philosophically about what is Microsoft's role here. At this point, I'm departing my slides, but we'll get back. It's all right. By definition, even philosophically, identity is something that can't be solved by any one party. If Microsoft was to ship an identity metasystem, it would work with our products, but it doesn't solve the identity problem. By nature, the identity problem is about connecting and authenticating between unlike systems. And so for this to succeed, we're going to have to build consensus in the industry that this is the right kind of approach. And we're going to have people implement interoperable pieces of this for other platforms, for Apple and Linux and Sun and IBM and you name it. And we understand that. That being said, people like Doc Searles, who's the Linux journal editor, have come to us and said, nobody can do this but Microsoft. You have all the desktops. You have responsibility to the industry to try to do this, because we either have to live in a world going forward where identity remains fragmented, or we try to, as a community, come up with a solution that everybody can plug into that leaves their identity investments in existing systems in place but makes them more valuable. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's the discussion we're having. That's why I've been going around talking to identity influentials and key sites around the world and platform companies to try to build this as a groundswell. So let me just breeze through this. I mean, the identity metasystem is intended to interconnect the different systems, just like IP connected the different networks. There's several key characteristics to it, which I'll do in different slides. This is just really vocabulary. Subjects are the individuals and other entities about whom claims are made. Identity providers issue identities. Relying parties use identities. Any party can be many of these in any interaction. These are not mutually exclusive. Negotiation is one of the pillars of the metasystem. If you can use many protocols, you still have to have a way to figure out what protocols we both speak. If Chris has SAML identities and Kerberos identities, and Vijay has SAML identities and X509 identities, they have a meta discussion about, well, what identities could we both use in common? They'll settle on SAML, and then they'll proceed on having an identity interaction. Another kind of negotiation is about what claims are required by a relying party and what claims can be issued by identities. So some identity relying parties may just want, proof that you are who you were the last time. Others might want name, address, phone number, email address, form of payment. And depending upon whether the identities provide those or not, they might or might not be applicable in the context. So negotiation is necessary if we're going to connect things. You need an encapsulating protocol, a way to exchange sets of claims that's independent of the claim format, a way so that you can move a Kerberos ticket or a SAML claim or an X509 cert, or something that hasn't been invented yet. Claims transformation is really one of the main keys. So let me give you two examples of claims transformation. So Microsoft might choose to make a claim that I'm a Microsoft employee. And we might have a relationship with Amazon where employees get a 10% discount, where in fact Amazon doesn't really care that I'm a Microsoft employee. What Amazon wants is an authoritative claim that I'm eligible for the discount. And so there would be a business relationship somewhere if this was done online where somebody transforms the claim from employee to eligible for discount. You could imagine a similar transformation from my birthday to an over 21 claim so I could purchase alcohol, or an under 16 claim so I could enter a chat room. There's another kind of claims transformation. If we're going to interconnect these different systems, it becomes necessary to change claims made in one system into a format understood by another system. So, your X509 cert might turn into a SAML 2.0 claim, or you name the rest. This is sort of the router function, right? This is like taking a packet from one network to another, and you transform elements of it, but it retains its essence. And finally, we believe it's necessary to have a consistent user experience so that people aren't confused. And at that point, I'm actually going to jump ahead to a mock-up of the user experience because I think that's going to be more illustrative about what we're doing than anything else at this point. So what's happening on this slide? This is a mock-up of the user experience for a user trying to sign into a site that they haven't established a relationship for. Now, why is phishing possible? Why is a lot of fraud possible on the net? It's possible because while we do sort of a passable job of authenticating users to sites, usually using username, password, and you know about password fatigue and that I have 100 passwords and I don't know how many you have, and there's a whole problem to solve there. But even if we solve that, which we are working on, the real problem is we do a terrible job as an industry of authenticating sites back to users. I went and talked to PayPal. It's no surprise that there's a site out there called PAYPA1 that doesn't have good intent towards PayPal. And that may have been shut down, right? But make up your own. This goes on all the time. And even well-educated people who are computer literate have a very hard time telling whether they're going to the real thing or a bad site. This screen is part of the problem, or sorry, part of the solution. Mike is fired. I'll see you later, Dave. So what this is initiated by is in the same place where a user would have tried to sign into a new site, instead of being requested to create an account and a username password, in what we call the InfoCard experience, which is the credential or the user identity chooser on top of the meta system, the screen would come up and it would say things about the site. So we're proposing to visit a site called Hot Air Travel, and this is about the site trying to prove their identity to the user. So we have its name, we have something about information use policy. We also have a logo. Why do we have a logo? Because people are better at understanding and relating to pictures than words. But this isn't just any logo. It came out of a signed site certificate. There's already standards for putting bitmaps into X509 certs, and so we're building on that and working with people like VeriSign, who gave us permission to use their name, but the other certificate companies as well, to have a new, higher quality kind of cert that basically what VeriSign is saying here is we stake our reputation on the fact that they are who they say they are, that this is their logo, and that we have vetted that they're a legitimate business and we're legally liable up to a certain amount if this is false. And this is part of the trust infrastructure that we're trying to put in place as part of the two-way authentication experience. So let's assume that the user decides, okay, yes, I do want to visit Hot Air Travel. They seem to be who they say they are. And oh, by the way, credit card companies and banks, when I talk to them, say, we have a better reputation than VeriSign. We should be in that business. And we nod and we say, yes, you should. So you say next, you go on, and you get to a screen. And again, this is all mock-up, but it's good for illustrating the point, where you choose which of your identities you use to sign in at the site. So each of your identities, we're trying to make visceral to people by displaying them and using a card metaphor. The card metaphor seems to work with most people. I mean, people are used to carrying around wallets of standard-sized cards, each of which conveys some claims about them and gives them certain rights and privileges. Now, there's several bugs on this slide. One of them is that there's only one kind of card up here, which is what we call self-issued identities. There's two kinds of sets of claims in the world. There's those that are self-asserted, where only the individual is making claims about themselves. And you think, well, where would self-asserted claims happen? Well, you use them all the time. If you go sign up at a website, an Amazon or something, you're the one making the claims about your name, your postal address, your form of payment. You could lie. It probably would degrade your user experience if you did, and you might be in legal trouble. But it's a self-asserted identity. Likewise, if I print a business card, maybe not my Microsoft card, but just any business card, that's all self-asserted information. You trust it based on trusting me for other reasons, or you choose not to. But there's a lot of self-asserted identities, and is what would normally be used to sign in to just sites on the internet. The other kind of identities are more like my driver's license. They're what we call managed cards, or ones where a company or a third party is attesting to the validity of the claims and that there's some relationship between the subject and the third party attesting to the claims. So we fully expect that there will be many identities, for instance, that are issued by people like Visa or issued by corporations. Amazon might have your Amazon identity, and you could use that to sign in to partner sites like eBay. But even more to the point, you might use it to sign in to little mom and pop sites. And this becomes the kind of technology that all of a sudden will do what, in the marketplace, what we tried to do with Passport, which is make it easy to accept credentials and to issue credentials and to form trust relationships across the network wide. So what I haven't said, and I'll just finish with this and then open up for questions, is what is Microsoft actually building? So yeah, let's do this. This is the transition slide where I go from this grand box and arrows vision of an identity metasystem to what bits are we shipping and what are we really doing? Well, it's no surprise that we've worked with the industry to develop a set of web services protocols based on XML using SOAP that solve specific problems. And we've done this in collaboration with IBM and Sun and CA and a list of 80-some companies. And not everybody's supporting all the protocols, and we don't expect them to. It's adoption as people see a business value or a social value in doing it. When we talked to one of the analysts, I think Stuart was the one who had this particular conversation. One of the analysts asked, WS star, what's the value of star? Is it 3 digits yet? And, yeah, there's a lot of protocols, but we're not asking you to eat the star, whatever the value of the star is. We're asking you to eat about 5 protocols that fit onto your hand, and in particular, the main one is this WS Trust protocol, which is the encapsulating protocol we talked about. It gives you the ability to move claims, to move identities independent of the particular system that they originated from. And remember, I talked about the need for negotiation so you can find a vocabulary to talk in common. Well, there's a general purpose negotiation protocol called metadata exchange that we use to do that negotiation. there's a vocabulary of utterances that you speak in metadata exchange called security policy that gives people a common way to say this is a SAML token, this is a Kerberos ticket, etc. We used to, in fact, say that this is the only technology we know of that meets the requirements of an identity metasystem. But Kim and I went and talked to Jeff Hodges, who's the chief Liberty Protocol architect, because we wanted to let that community know what was happening. They've done good work. And he said, well, actually, some of the Liberty protocols could be used to do claims transformation, but it wasn't intended for that, and we've never used it that way. So, but we wanted to be strictly correct, and we modified it to say it's the only technology we know of that was specifically designed to enable this kind of a meta system. You know, this is the pretty picture of what it would look like. The user would choose identities that might come from different identity providers. They might be transformed along the way so that this X509 identity could be used by a SAML-relying party. This extends the reach of the identities into systems where they were not previously applicable, just like Internet made it possible to send an Ethernet packet to Token Ring. So what are we building product-wise as a company? We're building this InfoCard identity selector as one component of it. This is a developer component that runs on Windows. It's the thing I showed you the mock-up of. It will ship as part of WinFX, which ships in the same time frame as what we'd been calling Longhorn until this week, which is now, I guess, Windows Vista. We'll all get used to that.
Until we're sued and forced to name it something different.
Windows Vista is the product name for the next consumer release of Windows. Yeah. Excuse me? WinFX is a set of developer components that mostly constitute the Indigo distributed system platform and the Avalon user interface technologies. It's all managed code, .NET code. And the beauty of it shipping as part of WinFX rather than Windows Vista is that it runs down level. That means when it ships, it'll run on Windows XP and Server 2003, as well as the next consumer release of Windows. And our marketing people tell us that means that when we ship, it'll run on 80% of the desktops that exist. Now, we understand that that's not the full solution. We have to be pushing to run on Apple. We have to be pushing to run on Linux.
What about Mono? Is it written in C#?
Mono's written in C#.
No, is this just managed C++ interface to it, or is it actually being implemented?
It's implemented as managed code.
Okay, so then potentially Mono could run too, right?
Yeah, I really don't know whether Mono's included as part of this or not. So, you know, this is something that could be used by dedicated applications. We eventually want the browser to use it. IE7 is not using it. They're not, you know, in a synchronous time frame where they could. But, you know, we've had discussions with Opera. We've had discussions with Firefox. The other browsers could use this on the Windows platform just like others. We've demonstrated interoperability with identity providers from companies like Ping Identity that are doing open source Java products. We really are very serious about the fact that unless this runs on all the platforms, it doesn't solve the problem. We're also building, just as a bootstrapping step, a simple identity provider that runs locally on the client. This gives you a place to have self-issued identities that you'd primarily use to sign in at websites or at other applications. Yes, Martin?
So I use about 3 or 4 different machines. Would I have a different identity in each, or is there an infrastructure for sharing that?
Well, you know, there's...
I can talk about that.
Okay.
So we can put it on.
There's roaming stories, some of which will be provided by the market, some of which will do. But I'll leave that to Stuart. But in fact, the simple identity provider is in fact intentionally designed not to be the whole solution. We're only doing self-issued identities, which can be used for username password replacement, which is a good by itself. But we fully expect that companies, the banks and the websites and whatnot, maybe the certificate companies, will issue identities as a business. You'll load them onto your machine, and you'll be able to use them as you roam. And there's stories about what happens in public kiosk computers. And of course, the marketing people want me to say that, go ahead.
And is I imagine if I'm a bank issuing an identity card, I'm going to want to limit your ability to choose to use that card other places.
That's right. So,
for my own security reasons, right?
Yes.
And does it support, both you making decisions and the issuing entity making decisions?
yeah, it has to do with what claims are requested and what claims are provided. And, there's a lot of strong crypto behind the covers where you can make assertions about whether they know information and whether they have access to a secret. And, all of this has to do with establishing relationships between the identity provider and the relying parties that they may choose to let use it. And if the relying parties can't prove that they're eligible to use the identity to the satisfaction of the issuing party, they won't issue the credentials and you can't do the sign-in.
So here's one way to think about that. The identity provider, as part of the posting business, could require the clients to tell the identity provider where the identity is going to be used. And then if it's a decision point where it's about to issue the token, well, I'm not going to issue the token. I'm going to give it to Bob State Tackle. Because I don't have a relationship with Bob State Tackle.
But that would be very transparent to the user.
That's right. There's full control both on the user's part and on the part of both ends of the identity interaction. As far as what we're building, for instance, all of our identity products will eventually plug into this. So, we have a great business selling Active Directory where there's Kerberos-based identities that people use in their companies. Eventually, I would be able to use my Kerberos identity at Microsoft, which gets printed as mbj at Microsoft.com, to sign into sites where the Microsoft identity authorities choose to let me sign in. So, for instance, my 401k is at Fidelity. I'm not speaking for the company, but it would be technically possible for Fidelity and Microsoft to enter a relationship where I could use my Active Directory identity to sign in there without having to have a separate Fidelity identity for my 401k. And then finally, we're building this Indigo platform for distributed systems components. Now, this is where I say, how does Microsoft make money on this? When we go out, people ask, the obvious skeptical question, well, what's in this for you? Why are you promoting this? Well, one thing that's in it is we believe that as we make jointly, not we Microsoft, but we the industry, make the net a safer place to be, more and more high-value distributed applications get written. They'll get written using the developer platforms that developers think are easiest to use. And we're making a bet as a software company that we can build great software for building distributed applications. That's where we make money, the old-fashioned way for Microsoft, selling software. In contrast to that...
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Just a simple point that if the market gets bigger, Microsoft gets a big share of that, and that's what you're saying?
Sure. But I'm saying something stronger than that, too, which is we have made a conscious choice not to monetize identity. That identity and the protocols are part of the common good, just like it would be stupid to try to monetize our Internet Protocol implementation. So all of this is using published protocols. We've been out sharing with people exactly how to build interoperable implementations of this. At Digital ID World in May, we showed interaction between our beta code and this open source security token server, which is an identity provider written by a company, a startup called Ping Identity, in Java, using only the protocols. And we are not trying to control what they do with that. In fact, we're encouraging them to do that. I can't name names because I'm not allowed to yet, according to the people. But I know of people who have commissioned implementations for OS X and for Linux, and this will be free code that could be presumably ported to the other Unix implementation as well. Now, this is real early. I'm not claiming that this is a solved problem and that we've finished the adoption curve. Far from it. But we believe that this is the right kind of solution for identity going forward. Mike?
How will this get integrated with Windows Vista from the point of view of the user experience? What will the interface to this machinery be in Vista?
So the story there is it will only be integrated for the applications that use it. And that is the weak part of the story right now, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not. We don't have browser integration by Vista, which is what most of the companies want. You go to an eBay or something, and they say, this sounds great, come back to us when you have the browser story. Now, in fact, we have browser plugin code that could be used to enable it.
Are we about ready to implement a new version of IE? Can't we build it in?
Schedule pressure is such that the answer to that is no, we can't.
That's too bad.
It is too bad. There's nothing that can be done about it, just in terms of developer headcount and schedule.
If you were king, would you contemplate adding this to the normal authentication dialogue that one has with the operating system? You talked about browser plugin, but this Control-Alt-Delete dialogue, could you imagine it becoming part of that? Or do you regard it as something that is above and beyond the way you authenticate yourself to the operating system on your machine?
Let's see. We don't have any plans to do anything like that. The model is that each user on the machine has a portfolio of identities represented by their InfoCard portfolio that they use to authenticate at sites where they choose to have a relationship.
Yes, but the site could be my laptop.
In the fullness of time, yes. We want to unify all the different ways that we handle credentials in the operating system to as small as number of ways as we can, but it'll take some time.
Back when P3P was under development, we weren't going to get to talk about P3P. The initial, no, well, I think this is an important point. The initial thought was that there was going to be kind of an automatic data transfer element as well as a machine-readable XML-like privacy policy. And the automatic data transfer section, which is clearly what this is. I mean, this is about authentication, but the cards implicitly contain different sets of data, which I assume are going to therefore be automatically transferred.
They'll be released subject to the user choosing to release them.
Right. Well, which is the same as it would have been in a P3P implementation, right? And that really received an enormous amount of pushback and was actually stripped out. And that was stripped out even though there was a joint effort to kind of automate the privacy negotiation before you got to the underlying disclosure of information. And I just raise it as a point of caution that, I think everybody believes that managing identity is useful. I think the federated model, I really like the term directional identity. I mean, I think, but my sense is that right now you say, do you want to see their policies? The lack of kind of a seamless way to understand policies.
You're absolutely right that one of the areas that we hope that people innovate and that we can build on it is some way of people visualizing and understanding information use policies that's credible. I mean, putting a 25-page contract in front of people, we all...
My students are working on this. We are.
Well, good.
But yeah, it's a hard issue, but I think Ira probably remembers this was actually a point of serious flare-up around P3P. And I actually was very
Send me a note about your students' work when we're done.
Sure.
This is something that we absolutely understand extremely hard, and it's not just kept that in the first version.
Right, and you know, we're describing right now a V1 release. There's other things which, you know, we've thought about for further versions, and we have to get something out the door, and there's a ship schedule. But
well, you don't necessarily need the same level of agreement and interoperability around all these issues. I mean, I think
that's right.
You certainly
and in
do.
fact,
And
you know, the user experience around something that Apple produces may be somewhat different, but it would still be consistent with within the Apple platform. So that satisfies the Law 7 of consistent user experience. Jeanette?
Do you have a time dimension associated with each identity so that you can have like a session identity and then it disappears and you trust that the person who just negotiated this identity has thrown out all this information and no longer...
Well, in fact...
And can you also have like these persistent identities that you trust the bank or whatever?
So it's possible, and again, this is partly in the market space and not in the infrastructure we're doing. For instance, to issue identities which are only good for 4 hours, or name your time period, which indeed is exactly the kinds that you want if you're at an internet kiosk in Peru and you don't trust the integrity of the machine. You do want it to expire.
actually, Fred just asked me a question. He said, how would people possibly object to a system that's going to give them complete control over the disclosure of their information? And just so people understand, right, that the card, one of the cards that was up there was use my generic browsing profile, right? Consumers are not going to drive what's included in the generic browsing profile, right? The market's going to drive that.
That's
and
right.
The bargaining power is not going to be equal, and it's going to be like, well, this is what we need to let you come to our site. And it's, the fear is that it's going to ratchet up the kinds of information people just typically disclose, and that it is, yes, it's under... and I don't want to detract at all. I think this is really important. I'm just trying to describe what the discussion was.
I understand that. Let me give you the Microsoft answer, which is in the identity provider we're providing really is a bootstrapping step to get this thing done. We made an explicit decision not to provide any high-value information. So we'll store your name, we'll store your address, we'll store a few other things that are publicly available. We will not store a form of payment. We will not store a national identity number. We won't store anything that if it was stolen, puts you at significant risk. Now, this is both a liability limiting choice for us, and we believe that because we'll have this one schema out there, that a lot of sites will just choose to accept that as a standard way to get in. And so we're intentionally setting the information disclosure bar low as a normal way.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, if right now when I go to a website, I don't disclose any of that stuff.
Well, in fact, to sign up at one, you generally do.
But
And
not
this
as my
replaces that.
browsing.
No, not as your browsing experience. It's the place where you would have typed the username password, and you would have had to fill out the sign-in screen, that all of this mechanism would ever get invoked. If you're just anonymously browsing, none of this happens. Let me say one slide worth of stuff, and I'm going to hand it off to my friend Stuart.
I'm still a little bit confused about the implementation scenario. So let's assume that Fidelity decides you guys are good guys, and they really, really want to get on board with this as soon as they possibly can.
Yep.
Once they've done that with what you're going to give them initially, how will it appear to me as a user of the Fidelity website? What will I see happen?
Well, there's a set of choices that Fidelity would make if they were deploying immediately.
Right.
One of them is they might choose to write a custom app that ran on your desktop that directly invoked this stuff and used
Let's
web
say they
services.
don't do that because that's distributing software.
Currently, there has to be some little piece of software on your box to invoke the get credentials call into Indigo to trigger this mechanism.
There's no way that we can make that available through the browser.
Technically, we can. In terms of negotiation with the browser platform team, we cannot yet. And there's an internal Microsoft discussion about what ship vehicle we will use.
But you said there could be a plug-in?
A plugin has been written. We do not have
A generic plugin that would make all such things like Fidelity work?
Yes, but we do not have, Jim Alchin's approval to ship that.
Maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but it seems to me that this can't possibly get off the ground without that.
Without it eventually happening.
No, without it happening at the beginning, because there'll be no way for people to use it, and people will not want to distribute software to get to use this. I mean,
Well, there are people who already distribute software in this arena, like Toolbar, for example.
yeah, maybe those guys, but
It's a little bit neat. We actually 100% agree with you. What is the killer app for this? The browser. Why do we keep giving you these evasive answers about the browser? Nothing to do with the technical issue.
I understand.
Has to do with ship schedule and ship vehicles and developer time. Paul.
Just make sure I understand this. Thank you so much. Everybody understands what happens and what the drill is when you lose your credit card. You call up the credit card company, you're protected by law, you only have $50 worth of damage. Take us maybe through the scenario. You lose one of the ID cards, you lose the secret identity, the deepest secrets. Who do you call? What do you do? Do you contact Fidelity? What's the scenario? Because if you're going to have a card, people inevitably are going to lose them.
Well, there's ways to back them up.
No, but it doesn't mean that it gets destroyed. It means that someone learns it, right?
No, there's two different questions. If somebody steals it, that meant that they stole either your computer and your login on the computer, or they stole an encrypted data file and managed to get the keys from you to decrypt it, which...
Or they had a virus in your computer and they snooped as the thing was getting decrypted. It's not impossible.
Right, indeed. Then you're in the same place that you were if somebody stole your username and password for that account. There's technical measures that I didn't talk about that make this much harder to steal than the username and password. Those screens I showed you, they run in a protected desktop in a place that is not under your user ID, is not scriptable, it's not screen scrapable, it's not keystroke loggable. Malware that's running as you, and I spent years as an operating systems researcher. I won't tell you 100% that if somebody completely rewrites the operating system, they can't get under this. But short of doing that, this is running using encrypted data in a place that normal software can't even see. So we have significantly raised the bar in being able to steal this stuff. Let me talk about one other thing. Why is it hard to spoof this? Why can't malware just put this up and get you to do the wrong thing? Well, and besides the technical measures, that this is running in a different place. It's sort of like Control-Alt-Del. It stops the normal user experience. You know you're in this special place. Let's use the wallet analogy. If you, as a malicious person, and I don't know what I just did to the screen. We'll live without it, unless David can resurrect it. If you're a malicious person and you're trying to give me a set of credentials to use, or you're trying to trick me into using my credentials, and you try to do this through the InfoCard experience, it's sort of equivalent of you handing me your wallet and trying to get me to use it. Your wallet might look just like my wallet on the outside, and malware could do that. But as soon as I open my wallet, I say, this is not my driver's license. These are not my credit cards. This is not my business cards. This is not my beautiful wife. It's not spoofable. I mean, the user studies behind this are just stunning. When we started, and this is one of the things I'm really proud of in the project, it is very driven off of user studies. When we started out, apparently we could only prevent about 15% of phishing attacks using scenarios that we'd envisioned using a broad population study. In fact, some of this was done with people at Microsoft Research. By the time we were done crafting this user experience, because it's so predictable and has so many places where if it deviates, people see, oh, something's wrong here, we can prevent 97% of phishing attacks on a broad population study. It's exactly because it's impossible to spoof this. It's impossible to spoof the previous screen and trick people. If the first screen says, oh, would you like to establish an identity with PayPal? and I already have a relationship with PayPal, something goes off in my head that says, something's not right here. I think I'm not going to go on. The 3% population that we can't stop the phishing, I might as well tell you this. This is a good joke. And then Stuart's turn. The 3% that we can't stop is almost uniformly 13-year-old teenage boys who are hell-bent on getting to a gaming site and will read nothing and care about nothing, and their only goal is to get to the site. If they won't read anything, it's hard to convince them that something might be wrong. For any user that looks at something, this user experience, the user studies, and will continue that, seem to say really helps solve the problem. Thank you. Stuart, take us away.
One question left here.
Fred.
I want to understand, come back to this nasty deployment issue. I want to understand how symmetric it is. So
He wants to understand how symmetric the deployment issue is.
there's this problem that there's this web browser that's going to ship, and they have a schedule, and for that reason, it seems like you can't get this in there. And there's some sense of people that if this were in there, it would be much more efficiently received in the market.
No question. No question.
Is there also some risk that if it were in there and it wasn't, and it was a bomb, that it would somehow compromise the acceptance of the browser and have been an unnecessary cost, in fact, a liability? Or is nobody...
I have never heard anyone say that that's a consideration.
Do you have a sense of what the ship delay is for inserting this?
Well, again, let me separate the browser for a minute.
Well, no, our context is we're going to write a report. If it's really important that this be in the browser, we can say that.
Well, indeed, we believe, as I believe you do, that until there's browser integration out of the box, that acceptance of this will be very limited. I mean, we get this message when we talk to the eBays of the world. We get this message when we talk to most people, because most people's user experience in distributed systems is the browser.
But the question is, to make a recommendation, one has to have some sense of what the cost is. Are we talking about holding the browser up for 3 years or for 3 months?
You know, I believe that the dev and test cost for doing this is measured in months, but as you know,
It's convincing the management that this is something to do. Is that what?
Management, I think, all the way up to Bill knows that this is something we eventually want to do. The question of what ship vehicle you put it in and what development resources to dedicated it to it when, a decision was made in order to get Internet Explorer 7 out very soon, that we would not engage with them until that ships. After that, I think a lot of options open to us, but you know, that's just the reality. In the meantime, we're continuing to talk to people in the industry. People are out there building security token servers. You know, I have in my pocket, this is a smart card. It's a security token server built by a company called Exalto that's a subdivision of Schlumberger. This runs a whole web services stack. You talk to it via Internet Protocol. You speak WS Trust to get credentials off of this. They do a much better InfoCard demo than we do. There's USB devices. I mean, this is part of the roaming story. Your credentials could just be here. They can't be stolen other than, you know, if you have the card, and if they don't have the card pin, they can't be stolen anyway. Martin?
Is it fair to assume that within a few weeks of you releasing this, there will be a plugin for Firefox? And then
I won't predict the future, but it could very well happen.
so maybe that solves the problem.
It would certainly be one solution. Stuart.
The net answer is we don't need any more political motivation. We don't need any help. We'll get this in the browser. It's just no comment right now on when that will happen.
The plugin, if you could be revisited at any point and released very quickly if once everybody says, okay.
Potentially. Potentially.
Could I ask another question about integration? I brought this up the last time this topic was discussed here. And this has more to do, again, with the user experience within Windows of this kind of facilities. The other part of the problem here is there are a lot of websites that still use password-based identification, even if they're HTTPS and moderately secure. It always struck me that if you could integrate this with a tool for managing all of those passwords, you'd have a serious winner. Have you given any more thought to that?
Well, I'm not really sure how that solves the problem. Let's walk through it for a moment. The core problem there is knowing if you are divulging your secret to the right place, right?
It's also just remembering which secret it is.
Well, there's remembering which secret. Yeah, that's one. That's a big problem. The other one is, but the heart of the phishing problem is, once you know the secret, let's say you had a perfect way of remembering it, how do you know you're giving it to the right person?
Right.
And today's SSL doesn't give you, what we like to say, it secures the first 4,000 miles of the connection, and then the last 2 feet are perfectly insecure, right? Because the user is like, well, yeah, the little lock is there, so this must be eBay, right?
Well, you can imagine things like having the password file associate the password with the SSL path, and then checking the certificate for you, and things like that.
Yeah, but what is it going to do? I mean, how is the computer going to make the decision on whether or not this really is eBay? If your intent was to go to eBay, which is why we were doing things like showing the logos and such, there may be some opportunities to wire this up with a
to make that stuff
form.
more secure. I'm just asking you to make it easier to use.
Well, yeah, unfortunately there's this balance between making it easier to use and making phishing a lot more effective and automated. Yeah, so I mean it's interesting. So just to Mike actually covered a lot of the ground that I'm going to cover, so I'll go relatively quickly. I'm just going to feed this out with the fire hose. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not sure who to ask this question to, but this whole thing is, the infocard notion is all about hiding the complexity of the different and the different kinds of identity system underneath the hood, as it were.
That's one of the things that does.
It seems to me that's a real security risk, because you're hiding the details of the security system from the user of the security system. So I could be seeing something that could be based on some really crappy crypto, or some really Mickey Mouse username password scheme, as opposed to something that's really very, very secure. And I won't, it'll all look the same.
But does happen over open protocols that can be better, interoperable circuit. You now have to believe what the crypto is and distribute it.
Okay. No, it's just that when the user, as far as the dumb user is concerned, it'll all look the same. So how will they know how much they can rely on something? And then you don't seem to have helped me very much, because, okay, you've now put in some authentication requirements, but that may not be very good authentication.
So you have a scenario where you have relying party X and identity provider Y, and they've both agreed that they're going to use weak security technology Z, and now the end user doesn't get to see and choose. It's like, okay, I'm going to engage in this this relationship with the relying party and the identity provider, but I don't get to be informed about the fact that Z, which Z is being used. I'm Canadian, so I just flip back and forth randomly, living in the U.S. I don't get informed that I'm using Z, so I don't get to have. That's a very, very interesting point, because we don't surface the technology at all in the experience today. It's one of the things, you're right, we were trying to avoid. Of course, and also because the system was implemented in a technology-agnostic way, new mechanisms can be introduced without the user interface ever being made aware of that. So that we don't, like, every time someone, if x59.a was introduced, we don't have to go and change our implementation. So that's an interesting point. We have to think about that. Right now, we're kind of assuming that within the relationships that are occurring, that the various parties aren't selecting bad technology or would quickly deprecate technology that was, say, suddenly cracked, right? Like, let's say someone suddenly found out that there's a weakness in SHA-1 or something. Then, we could, for example. Right. Then it's still up to the people in the system to deprecate those. I don't know if an end user could ever. It's like, can they tell the difference between 128-bit and 256-bit keys? Probably not, right? I mean, they could barely tell the difference between 87 and 89 octane gasoline. So. Although they do sort of assume that higher is better, and that's not always the case. So anyway, that's a very good point. We'll have to think about that, if there's some way that we can help inform users on that. A couple of points, just that everywhere where Mike just said impossible, I'm going to say very difficult or highly unlikely. The phishing case with the 13-year-old boy was actually one where he was asked to, in the process of going through the exercise, to enter a credit card number, and he simply went and grabbed. He doesn't have a credit card. He simply went and grabbed his parents' credit card number and stuffed it in. That's why he got phished, because he really had no idea what it meant to have this sort of giving out the credit card as being a bad thing. It's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll just go get my dad's. Let me just adjust this first. Did I just do something bad? No, okay. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, and I actually have some updated mock-ups of the UX to show that we've been working on. So how does this... Oh, darn, that didn't work. I'm trying to make it come up on my screen here. Podium follows screen. Come on. Yeah, it's not going to work for me. Okay, so I'm going to have to do this through by wandering over. So how does the system work? We talked about these protocols, WS Trust, WS Metadata Exchange, WS Security Policy. We talked about the players, the identity provider, the relying party, the identity selector, and some application that's using it. The way that the system works is extremely simple. I'm going to...
Stuart, get the Zucker, the forwarding...
I don't think that'll work with my laptop. Okay. So I'm just going to have to bounce back and forth here. The first thing that happens is the application wants to talk to the relying party, so it examines a policy on the relying party that is described in terms of WS Security Policy, and it uses WS Metadata Exchange to do this interaction and finds out what claims are necessary in order to access the relying party, what claims need to be provided. Mike talked a little bit about that earlier. And then what identity providers it trusts those claims to come from. The end user then looks at the identity selector. The identity selector pops up and presents a list of identities that will provide the appropriate claims for this transaction to occur. Once they've selected an identity, they are then either a credential is automatically entered or they are prompted to enter a credential, and then that is used to talk to the identity provider, to a thing called the security token service. And the credential is then used to authenticate the user to the identity provider, and then it returns back a security token in the desired format as requested by the relying party with the right claims in it, and then the application can then relay that token to the relying party. Now, all of the interactions occurred through the host and the application and the identity selector. So if at any point in this interaction the user opts out, decides they don't want to transmit those claims or don't want to obtain those claims from the identity provider, they can stop, cancel, and back out, and the token never gets passed. So in this system, the token is never passing directly from the identity provider to the relying party. That doesn't mean we prohibit that from happening. But if you build your application in this way, using this model, you can always have the user be in control, which was one of the points that Mike brought up earlier. Another point that Mike brought up in terms of the principles of the system is this need for claims transformation. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say that I have a relying party right-hand side. They want their claims presented in X509 because their stack is built on that mechanism. On the right-hand side, I have an identity provider that I would like to use, but they only issue SAML tokens. Yeah. How can I make this work in this environment? The reason why we are particularly interested in this scenario is not so much if it's SAML and X509, but let's say that one day some new technology comes along and the relying parties want to use that new technology. How can they introduce it without having to forklift out all of the identity providers and change all of the applications and end systems? Today, that would require that kind of forklift upgrade. In this model, I can introduce a claims transformer or identity transformer where the one party, relying party says, well, I need X509, so I can bounce backwards to the identity provider, get the claims in the token format that they can provide to me, and then I can do a translation from one format to another, either a technical translation or maybe even a semantic translation to get the right kind of claims to then send to the relying party. Go ahead.
Who's developing the translation thing, whatever the identity who's the identity transformer? Do both parties have to agree on the identity transformer? Do I get to pick my own identity transformer? Who's developing the language that transforms one to the other?
So the beauty of this model, first of all, is the STS, the security token service, which supports the WS Trust protocol, natively enables this notion of a transformer. All it is I ask for a security token and I get a security token response. It could be when I ask for a security token, I am required to present another token in the request. So in this model, what happens here is the relying party says, I want an X509 based expression. And if you get it from the transformer that I trust, so the relying party has indicated, I trust this transformer, so you can go to him or her. I don't want to genderize the software. But you go there, and it says, well, if you want to get the X509 version of the token, but you don't have a direct relationship with me, one of the things that you can do is go to someone I trust who could present a SAML token. And if I have the right identity in my system so that I can talk to this identity provider, then that identity will light up in the selector. I'll show that in a moment. I would then authenticate to that identity provider with my credential. I'd get the SAML token. I'd pass it to the transformer. The transformer would exchange that for an X509 token. And the nature of that transformation is all about the agreement between the transformer and the relying party. It's not something that needs to be prescribed beyond that.
But it sounds like the identity provider would also have to have a relationship with the identity transformer.
It may or may not. It depends on whether or not the identity provider wants to require that or not.
I guess if I'm a user, I would probably be more comfortable knowing that my identity was being transformed if I knew that the entity with which I already had a relationship, the identity provider, thought this was an okay entity, rather than the relying party. The relying party I'm just meeting, they might be asking me to use some identity transformer that's going to transform my identity in a way I don't like it.
So there's a couple of ways that we think about that. One is there's a degenerate case of this where the identity transformer is simply a local security token server for the relying party. It's within the same, I'm going to use the word domain, and I'm going to say that maybe we're going to represent the domain. The domain will be represented with a single key. So the fact that I'm talking to these two distinct entities, I don't consider them different because they're both being represented by the same public key, for example. In which case, I would treat from here to here as a boundary. So in other words, when the identity selector will light up saying, I'm talking to this entity, and they would like information from this entity. And then I'd click OK, and I'd get this thing. It would get transformed, and all that would happen. But since it's happening within the boundary of this domain, I don't care. Now, if this entity has a different key than this entity, it's some sort of true broker, then the UI will come up twice. Because at first it'll say, I'm talking to this person, I'm talking to this person, and they want information from that person. And I would confirm that. And then, because I'm crossing another domain boundary, the UI would come up and say, I'm talking to this person, and they want information from this person, and you'd have to OK that again.
And so the identity transformer, the way you showed us earlier, the little thing that says, and here's their privacy policy, do you want to proceed, all of that would come up with
it happens again. Yes. Every time you cross a boundary.
And who's doing who's developing the language?
The language for
transforming SAML to X509 or X509 to SAML?
We aren't prescribing that.
The market.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're not prescribing any of this. We're providing money.
So is there a standards activity that's developing a standard format for this equals this? Or, I mean, there are some standard language terms used in this thing.
There's some in the SAML world, there's some in the Liberty world, there's some in the X509 world. And ultimately, I think it was Butler, at least I think that when I talked to people, I said, well, Butler says all trust is local. And, we're not prescribing data trust. We're providing plumbing to enable parties consensually to form trust relationships. But who you choose to trust, just like in your earlier question about what if my bank doesn't want its credentials to be used by non-affiliates, that's its right. It has ways of doing that. There may be a market in token transformation in certain contexts that businesses would use for other businesses, and they would outsource it. They might bring it in-house, like Stuart talked to. We don't know. The beauty of this is you can do anything you want.
Well, the technical model supports. Yeah, the technical model supports. There was a question over here. Yeah.
So it seems to me like you're providing plumbing in the sense of providing syntax, but I think you should give some guidance on the meaning of these identity transformers. And when you say, for example, that a person A in SAML is a B in X509, does that imply also that a B is an A the other way around or not? And
well, that all depends on the nature of the agreements between these parties. So let's talk about that, for example. Let's say that this relying party is a book buying site, and let's say that the identity provider is Microsoft, and there is some business agreement between, let's just call it Amazon. So Microsoft, Amazon, and there's an agreement that says Microsoft full-time employees get a 10% discount at Amazon. Okay, so there's some translation that's going to occur where an assertion that I'm a Microsoft full-time employee is going to turn into a I get a 10% discount thing here. Yeah. That translation and mechanically all that happens is part of the federation agreement that happens between these parties and is not something that we're prescribing, right? It's just part of the business contractual agreement.
My comment is about the third party there.
Well, it depends. Yeah. Okay, so just imagine recursing that back as many times as you want.
Come on, this is bullshit. If Microsoft and Amazon cut that deal, then you know what's going to happen is that Amazon is going to say, since Microsoft is only producing SAML, Amazon is going to say, I'll take either SAML or X509, and it's going to internalize the transaction, the identity transfer.
Whatever actually happens in the ecosystem is whatever happens in the ecosystem. We are allowing all the knobs to be turned. We're not prescribing, okay, let's all agree on SAML. Ready? Okay, we're done. That's not going to happen. We can't prescribe that at that level.
I think I agree with you because the semantics of X509 is not defined. The syntax is defined, but the semantics...
Well, they're all attribute value pairs.
So we don't want to be getting the job of trying to say what the correspondence is between SAML and X509 because there's no way to get agreement on that.
No, I mean, but until we agree on what X509 means, we can't...
Yeah, and we're not in a position to decide what X509 means, so...
Yes. Yes.
Well, then they can market translators if they want to, right?
Yeah. People can implement the WS Trust protocol.
But somebody asked, are we going to sort that out? And the answer has got to be no. So I appreciate that why you wouldn't want to sort it out. But you could also imagine why there's a greater good if it's not, if there's some organization... Right, well, the world is full of wonderful standards bodies that I'm sure will be happy to take on these tasks.
No, but I mean, I think certainly the technical openness and flexibility is a nice thing, but to the extent that you want this to be, you can imagine somebody saying, well, that entity translated my certificate in a way that completely distorted what it said.
Life's hard.
No, well, life is hard. No, I mean, life is hard is not going to be a good enough response.
Oh, yes, it is.
Well,
you shouldn't have trusted them, you won't in the future.
No, but do you understand that the user is probably not going to have chosen in any meaningful way whether to trust them or not? I'm not suggesting that Microsoft needs to solve this. I'm suggesting that there's a point of tension here that you might want to think about whether or not you want to get some momentum going around a standardization of how to translate the attributes between those two things. You can do it or not, but
sounds like a great project.
Not for me.
Oh, maybe not for us either. Boy, I'll tell you, we don't want to get in the middle of any X509 semantics discussion.
So, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip. I'll make sure that you get these slides, but let me show you some more of the prototypes that we've been working on. Again, unfortunately, because I can't see it on my front screen, I'm kind of groping here. Okay, so here's a mock-up using Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer using the InfoCard system. So let me step through this. I'm about to visit the site, and let's say I'm going to press this to start the demo, but I'm about to log in to do something. So what just happened there? You notice there was a transition that happened on the screen, a visual transition where we grayed out the background. That represented the transition from the live desktop where the applications were running to a private desktop, which we create on the fly to display the user interface. We do that so that the applications that are running in your original desktop can't send window messages to this application and do things like find out what is being displayed on the screen, what the values of edit fields are, stuff like that. The InfoCard user interface has come up. It's announced that I'm visiting Amazon. In this case, I've been to Amazon before, so it's not asking me that question that you saw in Mike's first mock-up, which was, did you really intend to visit this place or not? Please confirm. So I've already been here before, so I can see I'm at Amazon. I'm about to select a card to use at this site. There's a variety of cards here. I've got a managed card that represents a managed identity that's sourced from an identity provider outside of my machine. I also have a card representing a local self-issued identity that's coming right off of my PC. Let's see what happens when I use each of these. First, I'm going to use my self-issued identity here. I can see the information that I'm about to disclose to the site via this card. Oh, they've got, let's see. Yeah, they shouldn't have put this. So these were done by designers, not by engineers. This stuff about a credit card number shouldn't be here because it's not going to be in this card. I can also look at things like the history of where I've used this card before. If I then choose to submit this card, I fade back to Amazon and I'm logged in. Let's take a look at the managed card now. Again, the transition, I'm going to log in. I'm going to pick my managed card now. Now, this managed card happens to be protected with a local PIN number. So I haven't even started to authenticate to in this case, the Visa identity provider yet. I haven't been allowed to use the card. I've PIN protected this particular card. I can do that on a per card basis. If I went ahead and I entered a PIN, I would then see the same information, the same sort of user interface. What's the information I'm about to disclose? When have I used this before? And in this case, this card also requires me to authenticate to the identity provider. Here I'm showing that the identity provider's decided that a username and password is good enough to authenticate to the identity provider. That's one case. Another screen might come up here which says, please put your Visa card with a smart card on it into the slot in the machine so that I can then do a certificate-based, a smart card-based authentication to the identity provider. Or it could use another card that you have in your system to authenticate to that identity provider. So here, you see there's a little bit of recursion that can happen in terms of the cards that are necessary to authenticate to an identity provider. And then once I've submitted that and I've authenticated, I go back to the original screen.
You don't think people are going to be confused by a PIN and a password both associated with the same card?
They could.
I'm confused already.
I mean, I understand why you're doing it, but...
Okay, so why do you need the PIN? Here's the reason why you need the PIN. There could be cards that you have in your system. Let me go back and actually show the personal card again. When I use that personal card, it actually asks me for nothing before I use it. If I click submit here, it's just going to work. Now, there are a lot of people who use, although, hold on, just one second. There are a lot of people who use PCs today amongst, say, a bunch of family members, and they don't have distinct logons for each family member. So I might create a card, and then my kids can use that card because we're all logging into the same account. I don't want that to happen. I'm going to PIN protect that card so my kids can't use that account or use that card, for example. Now, when we did our research, we did find that there are an awful lot of people who do use separate user accounts, in which case you probably don't need to PIN protect the cards unless you are worried about walking away from the machine and it being logged on, for example, and people walking up and using your cards. Now, go ahead. You have a question. A PIN. It would ask for a PIN. There's no point in asking for a username on a self-issued card, because that's just talking to the local machine.
Your first raised a really good question here, and I wonder whether the model for our demo is confusing point. Because one of the whole benefits of the system was to get rid of the 50 cards and 50 passwords.
Yeah.
50 passwords. Is it conceivable that that Bank of America card that you had would be a multiple identity provider card?
So that you could use it at many different places?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So by labeling it that, we may have said, okay, well, now if I have 5 banking relationships, does that mean I'm going to have 5 different banking cards or identity cards?
It could happen.
It could happen.
It depends on if you really wanted that to be the case. That could be the case, right? Because you might have 5 different credit cards and you use them in very distinct ways. I know people who use this, right? They have one card they use for bricks and mortar shopping, and they have another card that they use for shopping online, where they crank down the usage of that card. Yeah, or they have a very low spending limit on it so that people can't, it's hard for people to defraud them using it.
I'm thinking about the problem from the other way around.
Yeah.
We branded that card Bank of America, which seems to imply that if I have a relationship with Chase, I'm going to have a Chase identity card, and if I have a relationship with Fidelity, I'm going to have a Fidelity card.
Oh, you mean it would always be one-to-one? So
Correct.
So for every relying party, I have a relationship. So yeah, you have to disconnect this notion that an entity that I'm involved with may be just a relying party, or it may also be an identity provider and a relying party. And it may issue me an identity, or it may not. So Amazon may decide to issue identities that could be used beyond Amazon in other places, or they may not. And they might just say, oh, if you want to come to Amazon, you can use your Visa identity to log on to Amazon.
But if everybody decides to, because it's just about what we do, if everybody decides to issue their own identity, we really haven't solved one of the goals.
Right.
Well, you have, because not every identity is going to be useful on every site. Let me go back in the UI for a second.
I think you're showing off all the things that could happen, but if what you were trying to do was say, and the world's going to be better, this particular example of having a wallet full of credit cards is not something that makes me say, oh, good.
Because you remember at the...
I understand it's just showing what you might have to do in something short.
Especially if there's a PIN and a password with every one, you've doubled my complexity now.
Yeah, well, it's your choice. It's your choice to PIN protect the card, and it's the identity provider's choice for the kind of credential that you use with the identity provider. I would expect the mainline case to be no PIN and a smart card associated with the identity.
I think what you're hearing, though, is you pitched it in the first presentation as this will help with password fatigue, which is a normative claim.
Right.
Yet the illustration here, as I think...
Okay, well, I'm literally, and I'm not trying to sell you on anything here. I'm just showing you an engineering prototype. So
here's a way to maybe make the point. One thing we might want is a simple implementation so real people can do it, and it would be very simple. Another thing you might do is this, which shows we can have bells and whistles and lots of function. Yeah. And those two different things got merged together in this presentation.
I take the point that this was not, all I literally did, right, because I wanted to show you the raw stuff, was just, these are the prototypes that we literally built with the design firm. So
another basic point is Bank of America Visa here is acting as an identity provider, not as a service provider, or whatever, not as a relying party.
Yeah.
So I think people are getting hung up on the idea that you're using this, you'd have lots of banks, so you'd have lots of bank identity providers. That's not acting as your bank, it's acting as your identity provider. It may be your bank as well.
Right.
Actually, I think having a bank as an example is very confusing because people think about banks as actually doing banking with it. This isn't for doing banking.
Well, either they think about it as doing banking with it or as using it at a relying party, right? I'm visiting Amazon and I'm about to give them my Visa card so I can complete a transaction.
Well, you didn't tell us that story.
Yeah. But that's what was happening, right? When the screen came up, we were at Amazon and we were logging in.
That's different
Then
from spending money.
Yes, that's different than spending money. I'm merely using, and this is maybe they have to rebrand they have to use a different brand for their identity provider services than for their financial services, for example.
We're just picking on your presentation. I think we all get it. So
but the point of, like, maybe I have a lot of cards, but you'll notice that the user interface has also sorted the cards to the ones I can use at the site. So if I had this problem where I had, a card for I had an identity for every site I visited, but they couldn't all be used at that site. Only one of them could be used. Well, I've sorted that problem out of the way. Only one card will show up in the user interface as useful in that scenario. Using the negotiation protocol, we can tell that.
I don't think this is just a question about the presentation, though, because at least the way I understood this started with, we're starting with this incredible world today in which we have all these different account relationships and we have all these passwords and usernames, and this is somehow going to make it easier for individuals, ordinary, normal people, to be able to deal with this. And that, to me, suggests I'm going to have fewer of those things. Now, the question I would ask is, who is going to undertake to issue the identity verification document and take the liability for it being relied on by others? In other words, I know why my bank does it for my relationship with my bank. They have to, because they want me to be their customer. But why should they take on the liability for my using that with Amazon or with eBay or with somebody else? Because right now there'd be a lot of liability attached to that. Moreover, most of those relationships aren't face-to-face relationships. So who's going to verify identity in a completely remote relationship? So that the promise really depends on a market existing, which really doesn't exist today in a meaningful sense. And what I don't know, and maybe people here, Peter, you would probably be a good example, is whether there's reason to think that market would ever evolve in the face of these types of stimuli. I don't see it.
It's only going to work when you want to spend money.
Well, okay, well,
self-issued credentials will be fine.
Yeah, self-issued credentials require no, require no bootstrapping of the identity providers in the sky. There are other examples. Let's see if we're showing any here of relationships that do exist, like your relationship with your employer. Your employer could give you a card, and then you could use that at places where your employer has relationships with outside parties, and that already happens today. There are cases, for example, more popularly in Europe, where they're now issuing these national identity cards that have smart cards on them, can be used. They're going to be used in these contexts either to talk to the government or to talk to agencies that are involved with the government, where you want to prove that you're a citizen of the country or that you're of a certain legal age. So those ones, we already see those relationships, those electronic relationships happening. These other ones that are these other ones might be a little harder to see them happening right away. Things like somehow leveraging your relationship with your financial provider to provide identity services at other places, and whether or not they think there's a business model for that. Whether or not maybe your telecom provider would do the same thing, right? Because when I got my phone, my mobile phone, I was in-person proofed by them. They looked at they did do some sort of validation of who I was when I got the phone. That didn't happen with the credit card. The credit card company was still willing to take on some liability associated with me when they gave me the card, et cetera. So those models exist, but whether or not they're going to want to charge for this and they think they can make money on it is a whole other story. I agree.
Those don't seem like very good examples, and maybe they're better ones. I mean, the telephone company's verifying you for something that is a very low liability connection, unlike verifying you for access to the 401k that you maintain at Fidelity. And I mean, it's just a question. I mean, we may just not have enough data to know who is going to want to take on that type of liability.
Let me just thought. So there was a lot of discussion in the banking industry in the late 90s of whether to take on this function. And their answer was no. They didn't want to be there because they saw very little upside for money, and they saw a lot of liability problems. And so was CertCo one of the companies that went in? They spun off from Bankers Trust, if I remember correctly, because Bankers Trust had initially thought this was a way to make money, and then they said, well, we're not going to play in that space. So I think that what I take from Fred's point is there's a question of who wants to be the insurer here.
Why would anybody want this?
What?
Why would anybody want this?
You're saying it's a risky place to be for that.
I'm saying, why would anybody want it?
Well,
the world is certainly.
That's right.
What's wrong with a self-issued identity?
Okay, but if
I'm not going to spend money and I'm not going to deal with the government, what's wrong with a self-issued identity?
Well,
of course there's no market.
Well, but so we're just
supporting the complaint.
Yeah. So okay.
I'm saying there's not a problem.
Well, the problem is thinking that the top left-hand corner is going to happen that way. The Bank of America
only happen when you want to spend money.
Well, but now another place we use credit cards is at the airport. I put in a credit card to pull out my ticket, and I simply don't know what they check. What are they?
The self-issued one will be fine for that.
Not TSA's view, I don't think.
You
think they're going to allow me to
TSA doesn't regard that credit. I can't present the credit card when I. But no, I have to show them a government-issued photo ID in order to get in.
As opposed to get the ticket.
That is absolutely not right.
Actually, that's not true either, though, because TSA will accept two forms of identification without a picture, including credit cards. So this is exactly the point. Well, maybe it does. I mean, maybe we're coming full circle to say the problem is just for the presentation. But this is combining, this is suggesting for every relationship on the web, there's another card to go with it.
No, I didn't. No,
why would they do
absolutely
that?
not. There's a difference. See, we know that there's a spectrum here where either there's, and we've tried both of these things, right? There's one identity provider for the entire internet,
Right.
Or there's one identity provider for every relying party you visit. Inevitably, the answer is somewhere in between. We know we already failed at the first one. The other one could happen, but the ecosystem will adjust.
And that's what I'm asking. Is there a market?
Market forces will
I'd
determine.
just like to say, recognizing Fred's concern, I'm more optimistic than the question sounds. Because I think there are solutions I think there are various people, organizations who will play in the middle, but I don't think it's easy to predict exactly who's going to win there.
Oh, absolutely not.
And so that's why the flexibility makes a lot of sense.
So let's ask a real world question. When I go through the TSA check and I present 2 Visa cards and they let me through and I blow up the plane, are those Visa card issuers liable?
Yeah, they're charged. No more than your driver's license issuer is liable.
Boy, this liability thing is weird.
Right, but that's a silly question, because the real question is, if Visa, let's say, says, we're going to authenticate identity as a service to the traveling public, and then you present your Visa card and blow up the plane, like Stephen Brill is now offering the service, they will be liable. That's how it works.
That's not what they're saying.
Right, but that would be if they're doing this. In other words, he's saying, don't think of it as a credit card. Think of it as a promise to verify identity, that we know who this
TSA is
person
accepting
is.
these credit cards, and Visa isn't saying absolutely no.
The idea is they're going to accept Stephen Brill's card.
Exactly.
Let's talk about a real. Why is this weird? Put this aside. It's not a real case.
Why we have this technology? Why is Amazon going to use it, and why is Bank of America
Well, the
offering?
difference between now and the late 90s, for example, is that there was no phishing in the late 90s, really, of concern. Neither was there a dip in the people's credibility or people's worry about their ability to work on the internet without, we entered it was a safe garden, right? And we have to make it safe again. So this is one of the mechanisms we think that we can do that. If only because if we don't do this, for example, let's say we didn't adopt this model, what will happen? We already know that a lot of the federal regulators have started to hint that things like if you want to do online banking, you should really require two-factor authentication. There was a memo that went out from, who was it again? Was it the
Office of the Controller?
The Office of the Controller said, if you offer online banking services, you should really require two-factor authentication. There was a memo that went out.
What does that mean?
Two-factor authentication. So something that you have and something that you know, as opposed to just something that you know. So one-time password tokens are one way of doing this. Smart cards are another way of doing this, each having their own sort of ups and downs. But we have sort of historical precedent that when these memos are usually sent out as a foreshadowing of future regulation. So maybe one day the U.S. government might say, if you want to do online banking in the United States or offer online banking in the United States, you must have a capability for two-factor authentication, or you can only conduct it using two-factor authentication. These things could happen, right? And
what's that got to do with what we were discussing?
Well, here's the reason. Let me get there. So if we don't do something where we create this unified user interface, we could run into a situation where everyone is giving you a card, and you've got to now, it's like you want to access a site online. Well, okay, I'm going to go into my wallet. I have to find the right card, and I have to stick it in. And I really will have this one-to-one relationship. Every relying party is an identity provider. Having the intermediary here, the user interface, and the way that we can sort of abstract these out, allows us to imagine a world where the slider doesn't go all the way to the side. It can be allowed to move around in between. And those things like regulatory forces may cause some of these identity providers to pop up.
So I think there are two pieces on the table. One is the need to have these flexible protocols. And I don't think anybody debates that, because we don't know how the world is going to go. The other is you've shown us user interface, and it also has a lot of flexibility. And a lot of the debate was whether the flexibility, some dimensions of the flexibility are going to be exercised because the market won't exist. One could argue about whether it's a good idea to have all that flexibility at the start. It may be something you could add. This morning I learned a new verb. It's to dog food, apparently. And the obvious question is, if you've got these user interfaces, and my concern, my two-password question was that it was going to be confusing to a naive user. Have you dog-fooded this stuff widely to the kinds of people who you want to be comfortable with?
Right. That's not dog food.
Well, there's
usability testing.
Yeah, usability testing. We bring people in off the street. We give them tasks. We watch them through one-way glass.
But it seems like you've got two classes. You've got naive users, and you also have the banks
Yes.
or everybody who's a potential customer in
Security wonks, one side. Some of the big websites tell us, for example, that their strict target is someone who has an 8th grade education.
Okay, so if you tell me you've done that, and they're not being confused by all of this, then I think we don't have a leg to stand on by complaining.
I won't say that yet, though. We're in the midst of testing these various prototypes. It's not proven.
But at the high level, does this new technology have the potential to make the password avalanche a lot worse?
To make the password avalanche worse? I don't think it can make it any worse.
Sure, by 2x.
Why?
Because you've just created a bunch of pins that are associated only with your user interface.
And that was the user chose to protect the card with a pin. They could do that.
They made I know their gun, their foot, but they made it twice as bad as it used to be.
And they only have to remember. Well, they have to remember as many pins as they decide, and at least these pins aren't being divulged to outside parties, right?
Remembering part.
Yeah. Pardon me?
So you use one pin across all of these cards?
Sure.
They could, or they could assign a different pin to each card. It's just a matter of what they enter into the user interface. So, yeah, the pin protection, I understand that's somewhat controversial, especially if you put all of the protections on the card, it could be very convoluted to use it.
Okay.
I agree.
So it's got that potential.
Yeah, it has that potential. And
it's really an instance of you're providing a lot of flexibility in the user interface because you're not quite sure where the world is going to go, and you want to make sure you've got that covered.
The problem will occur if in the mainline case, people need both a password and a PIN to use a card. We don't think that's the mainline case. We think the mainline case is, in fact, it's a self-issued card, there's no PIN on it, and it's just click, 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 and you're done. That's, we believe, is the mainline case.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed that every time they ask me to send a credit card over the internet, now they're asking me to give the extra 4-digit secret code that used to be. Oh, I thought, oh, that's nice, but now you have to now everything has to be sent. There's nothing you can hold back. So I could imagine people saying, well, you'd be an idiot to use this system if you don't put pins on all your codes.
I think it's so complicated you can't be an idiot.
Well, in the scenario you just described, I would more likely, I would prescribe that you issue some sort of a token to the user, like a smart card, and there's a pin associated with the smart card, and that's how you would do that. I wouldn't.
So you can imagine the technology evolving to a smart card reader model.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be. Well, it could be smart cards or it could be USB. Like the form factor of how the smart token electrically connects to the PC could be the card format. It could be the card format has a nice side effect that you can put it in your wallet and you can sort of bend it a bit, and it's not. You probably won't destroy it. The USB format is very convenient because you don't need to have the card reader, because a lot of PCs don't have the card readers. They have USB ports, but then it ends up being something you put on your keychain.
It doesn't have to be true.
What doesn't have to be true?
What you just said. You can have completely flat USB things. That's slightly illegal, but they work.
Well, and then there's various, like I know that Microsoft Research is doing some research in near field stuff, so radio stuff that's very close as opposed to, say, Bluetooth. But there's various ways that we can do it contactless.
So what might happen is there'd be this awful kind of manual way, and then somebody might sell something that would allow you to manage all that stuff in a secure way with something physical. One scenario.
Well, yeah, and we actually have a great candidate for it. It's called the smartphone, a really smart phone. And if we have a way for the smartphone and the PC to talk to each other that is very easy, like a Bluetooth type way, then it has the nice side effect of all of your keys and all of your information is actually on the phone, not on the PC. And you're always agape.
And the only problem is, can you secure the smartphone? And the answer is definitely no.
Well, and we have various ways. I'm not sure. We demonstrated at TCAAB, for example, a service now that we've put on the smartphones where if you lose your smartphone, you can call your provider and say, destroy the phone, and they will call it and wipe it, right? So that you can...
Can I call your provider?
all those problems already exist. Right? You can call my provider and say that someone's...
So good!
The provider for the smartphone.
But if my phone gets infected by a virus...
Well, you can call and cancel my credit card, too, if you know enough information about me. It all comes back to how did you do the bootstrap of your digital identity.
But I think this actually is very helpful. I mean, really going back to Fred's comment, I think part of my surprise is that the presentation seemed to start, 2 hours ago, and here are all these problems, and here's how we're going to solve them. In reality, this may not solve any of them at all. It's rather that this is an interface or a whatever word you want to use, an architecture or an architecture that will make it possible if somebody wants to step forward in that market that could be used to help, if you will, automate or integrate.
The problems of identity are only 10% technological, and they're 90% sociological. And so, obviously, yeah, we need to create an ecosystem in which, and a market in which these things can settle themselves out. We cannot dictate with technology. So just really quickly, you might wonder how we're building it. So I thought I'd show a couple of slides from our specifications that show the architecture of the system. In the top left-hand corner, there's an application, client app labeled, talking to, on the top right-hand corner, a web service. And in the back and forth between the client application and the web service, a policy is read off of the web service that says, in this case, in this example, I need you to get a security token from the STS, the first STS, here, in order to use the web service. And when you go and talk to that web service, in this case, the client is using the Indigo runtime, which is our web services helper for developers. It then immediately talks to the STS, and the STS then has a policy on it that indicates, hey, I need you to provide me a security token of the following nature. That causes the Indigo runtime to call into its set of token providers and say, can any of you give me this token? One of the token providers is one that talks to the info card system via a very simple API, get token, where you pass down the policy that's been uttered on this STS and then the identity, the recipient identity, so where is this information going to go? The info card system is running on the PC as an NT service under the system context. Inside that service, we have our self-issued token factory, we call it, or the self-issued STS, where I can mint my own cards. We have a ledger that remembers the places I've used various identities and where I've gone. You'll remember there was a history in the UI, so I could see how I was using my identity. And then finally, that system also uses Indigo to talk to the remote identity providers that are out there, as in all the examples that we've talked about earlier that are out there in the sky. So that's the general architecture. The way it looks in the system in terms of just processes, we have the InfoCard service. There are precisely two APIs to talk to this system. One is to get a token, and the other is manage. In both cases, calling these APIs makes the user interface come up and makes the user do things. So you can't actually call the system and get a token without the user confirming something in the user interface, or at least having said in the user interface there might be on a particular interaction a always use this card here sort of checkbox, which would then well, actually we're having this debate whether that might mute the user interface or not. The idea here is to make sure that any time we're about to disclose information about the user has an opportunity to press a button and say yes, or press a button and say no. That manage call just causes the interface to come up so that you can manage your cards. Imagine a control panel applet, for example, where you could manage your cards. Inside the service, we have the token factory. We have our store modules that store information about the cards that you have in the system. That's all held in encrypted files, encrypted under a system key, not under a user key. So even if an application, as Mike was talking about earlier, if an application is running in the user's context and tries to read the files, it won't be able to read the files because it won't have access to the key. Although this does not protect a system-level attack. If someone is able to get a virus on your machine that can run at the system level, it will be able to read those encrypted files. It will be able to liberate that information. So we can't stop that. That's the sort of the state-of-the-art with computing systems today until we do something about that. And the UI agent runs in a completely separate process. We hydrate that in the user's correct terminal services session so that they can see the UI. Again, that's where we create the desktop, we show the UI, and we're away from the actual desktop where other applications are running. Any questions on that? I'm getting very close to the end. So one of the things that we do, we have a particular keying strategy that we use to make roaming a lot easier. So one of the laws was, okay, which law was it? Law 7? No. Yes. A directional identity.
No,
4.
5.
I haven't got it quite. 5 is pluralism. 4. So law 4 was directional identity, the notion that the system must support both a public identifier for me, but then also pairwise identifiers for me. One way to do pairwise identifiers that's very straightforward is every time I go to a site and I create a relationship with that site, I'm going to generate a key pair and store it. So I'll have to remember a key pair for every relationship that I have. And not only that, if I'm using these cards on one computer, and then later I go to another computer, I have to move all of those key pairs from one computer to another. Every time I create a relationship, I have more things to roam. We thought that was bad, so instead we use a master key strategy where so I create this master key, big old random number, and when I create a relationship with a site, what I'm going to do is generate a key pair for that site that's based on the site's identity and my master key used as a seed to generate a key pair. So all I have to do now is move the master key around, and there's one master key associated with each card. So if I export a card from one system and import it into another, and then I go and visit a site, I will be able to generate the key pair on the fly that I need to use with that site by using the site's identity and my master key to generate the key pair.
Just to detail, if you really use the site public key, your identity is going to have to change every time that the public key of the site expires.
If the public key of the site rolls, yes, we have to accommodate the rollover of the public key of the site.
So why do you do that rather than domain names or something of the sort?
Well, you eventually have the same problem. But with the public key method, we can verify that we are actually talking to that entity, right? I mean, we can use cryptography to be sure. The domain name, anybody could utter any domain.
Well, not to some extent, right?
Yeah.
It's public.
But you can prove possession. You can make them prove possession of the private key in the conversation.
Okay. That's what Verisign is. It's a substitute.
So, in the pairwise key model, we generate the keys on the fly. If you had a notion in the system, and we have this built in, but it isn't really fleshed out in the first version, where you wanted to have a public identifier for yourself, then you could just use a constant with the master key, and then anytime you use that identity in that particular context, you'll use a consistent key everywhere. So in a peer-to-peer relationship, where when you create a relationship with person A and person B, but you want person A and person B to know it's you when they are talking to each other, then you need to have a constant key across all those relationships.
Another question, you say privacy keys. Are those just encryption keys or also signature keys?
In this case, these keys are used for authentication.
So they better be signature keys then?
Pardon me?
They better be signature keys, not encryption keys.
Well, are you talking the X509 sense?
I'm talking SSL. I mean, if you're going to use X509 for SSL, you need signature keys for the card.
Yes.
Yeah.
So used in an X509 context, they would be signature keys, not encryption keys. But these are just keys.
No, I just said because you call them privacy keys. I didn't know what that meant.
Oh no! But we call them. Sorry, yeah, you're right. We call them privacy keys because they're pairwise. So if I go to Amazon and I go to eBay, I don't use the same key at each place.
Fine, yeah.
Yeah, privacy. Not privacy as in message privacy. So roaming we talked a little bit about, and then someone asked a question earlier. So if I'm using a PC and I've got a whole bunch of cards on that PC, be they managed cards or self-issued cards, how do I take those cards and use them on another PC? In the first version, we're going to have this simple mechanism to encrypt and export the card material onto storage, say a USB storage dongle, take it to another PC, import it, and now you can use it there. That's not suitable, for example, for a kiosk type scenario because you're going to leave your keys behind on the kiosk. Absolutely not what you want to do. So you'll only want to do this within PCs that you quote-unquote trust, maybe the PCs in your home. In the future, we imagine that the system is designed such that you can factor the local STS and the card store right out of the system. So what we imagine is, as Mike was talking about, we already have smart card vendors who have full WS Trust implementations on a smart card, something as small as a smart card. We have great hopes that we'll be able to remote your entire card system onto something like a phone. That way you can carry this around from PC to PC. And even if it's a kiosk PC, well, you could use a kiosk PC, and if the PC was compromised, it could impersonate you while you were on that PC to a certain extent, but only to the particular place that you were communicating to. And then when you walked away, you took your keys with you, and they're always embedded in here.
So you're basically, your guys' intuition is phone's a great place to put that because we're just at a phone.
Well, I once talked to a fellow who said there are 4 invisible devices: your phone, your car keys, your watch, and your wallet. People don't realize they're carrying them around. They carry them around as a matter of fact. So if we can overload one of those invisible devices, then we're not going to require, it's not such a bad bootstrap as saying, oh, now I need you all to carry this blah. It's your digital identity. Get used to it. So we'll see. There are people already, watch CNBC. You'll see the E-Trade ad where they're like, hey, we'll give you a one-time password token. You can use that for trading. And it ends up as a fob, like a keychain fob. And you can imagine if there's password fatigue today, there could be dongle fatigue tomorrow, where I've got like this, janitor's key ring of all these things, and I'm trying to figure out how I put them in my PC. So that's, not much of a trade-off for password fatigue. They're a lot heavier. They don't fit in your pocket as well.
I guess I still am wondering if in the presentation there's kind of a movement sometimes where the info card is a virtual card, and sometimes a physical thing. Other than maybe a phone, maybe a dongle, maybe a card, the USB.
Yeah.
And I think that the security, social, and privacy implications are quite different, not only in the virtual versus physical scenario, but also then in the type of physical product it is. And we got a taste of that when it was like, just call your phone company. And people said, oh my God, good luck doing that. And so, and I really, to some extent, what I'm hearing though then from you guys is, well, but the market will take care of this, or we're in negotiations and we don't want to talk about the product. But I think in the presentation now, it's not clear, at least in my own mind, whether it has been kind of sort of planned and plotted out. What happens when you go from the virtual thing, which seems to be fairly well thought out, to these thingies that are carried about?
Right. So let's see if we can be. I should be more clear about the terminology. So the info card is that thing that shows up in the UI, right? It just looks like a card, right? And it's virtual. The use of a particular card may require the use of a physical credential, like a smart card. It's unfortunate, sort of unfortunate we called it info card, because people always go, well, what's the difference between an info card and a smart card? Well, a smart card is something you hold, right? An info card is this picture in the UI, virtual representation. It's metadata about some relationship that you have. So yes, there are various kinds of credentials you can use with that virtual card. The virtual card itself may live on your PC, or it may live on another device. The other device may require a physical credential as well. Some devices, like my phone, which is a GSM phone, happen to have, it's a smartphone, in fact, so it has lots of processor power, could be the credential itself for that virtual card. So, but there's definitely the virtual card and the credential used with the virtual card. The virtual card could live in many places. The credential could be physical, or it could be hard or soft, I should say. We should be, we need to be more clear about that.
Explain it to us tonight.
Okay, so any questions? I got pretty bored up here presenting, so.
This sort of, this is the security intensive side of the world, and I think about how, for a lot of people, they have cell phones on them all the time. There's different subpopulations that this has to work for, and I'm not sure that's come out from our group as much is there's people who are in Kinko's and that's the only way they get to use computers, or they're in public libraries, they're in other places they don't trust, they're on the beach and they need to be able to carry it while they're at the beach for the day because then they're going to go do something after that. And so the range, the flexibility that seems to us so puzzling because each one seems hard is a flexibility that you have to have, or else people won't be able to do the pervasive computing that they're going to want to do. And so there's good reasons to apply really harsh scrutiny to each one of the pathways. But I think that the range of pathways is going to be huge. It's going to be huger than we've heard yet. That's why the ecosystem has to be a big part of the answer, because we're all thinking, a lot of us are thinking about like the computers that we own, and that's just going to be a fraction of the way people do computing going forward.
Yeah, the passwords have this one really brilliant quality, and that's that you roam them in your head. So they're always at your disposal. It's kind of like the only good thing about them. And if we try to take that away from people and say, well, I'm going to manage keys for you, I have to manage the keys in a device, and all of a sudden I have to carry something, and that's until we start embedding chips in people. Let's not talk about that. So yeah, you're right. It's going to be very interesting to see how we carry these things around and how we can use them with our various computing devices, be they more than just, it's funny, when we talk to the telcos, it's really interesting, because when we look at this, we see a really little computer. And when they see this, they see a really big cell phone, right? So, and then your car might want you to authenticate to it, and blah blah blah. It goes on and on and on. The various, we can't predict how computing may evolve from that perspective. But I do know, if I want to really embrace this, I have to carry around a device that has my keys on it, so that I don't have to manage them in my head.
Actually, when we talked to some of the cell phone companies lately, the operators say, the credentials have to go with the phone. The phone would be the UI, service provider, and people like Orange or Verizon might want to be in the business of loading your credentials and increases lock-in, you lose the phone. Butler was thinking the connection between the phone and the service provider may not be secure.
Well,
we don't want to put those passwords on some server out there that there's something to be said that.
Well, Identity Commons and some of the other people are out there believing that we can do free services for credentials that are trusted. There's a lot of interesting market opportunities. That's one of the really fun things about this. Every group I talk to that's thought about identity is able to map this into their notions of the way the world should be. Some of those things are true. That's good.
Actually, Jeanette, this argument that you don't want to store your credentials on a server, you're making an assumption about vulnerabilities. In particular, that it's harder to compromise the cell phone in your pocket than it is to compromise the server out there. And because it may be that you don't download the credential ever to your phone, and it's by remote control causing it to go off the server, and maybe the server is actually a lot more secure than your cell phone.
And that isn't going to work, because if I can compromise the phone, it can impersonate me to the server.
Maybe, maybe not. It depends.
But how would you stop it from doing that?
Depends on what kind of authentication the phone requires.
I said, passwords live.
Well, you may reduce it to a password.
Right.
So even if you don't compromise your phone, if I have my phone here, what do you think is more secure, my SSL connection to the server or my phone connection to the server?
Presumably it'll be encrypted, so that'll be the same.
Which one is better?
They'll be exactly the same.
They're not. This is SSL encryption. It's not running SSL.
I understand that, but it will.
Hopefully, but until then,
It certainly wouldn't have a lot of phone security that is deployed today.
That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
We're more likely to change the GSM encryption than anything else, because that's invisible to all the people who own cell phones. It's just how the phone talks to the server, and you switch your phone every 3 years.
There is no reason to change the GSM encryption.
I think you just a paragraph ago argued that it's going to, the GSM encryption is going to be replaced by SSL.
I didn't say that.
What did you say?
Put it on top. Right.
Can I?
But you don't change it. That's just an addition for this particular.
Go ahead.
You want to change it for other
A
reasons.
slightly different question. I'm still a bit puzzled by the example. Maybe it would help if I had a couple of use cases in detail to understand what exactly is implied, for example, by your notion of a bank or a credit card company issuing with a credential. Is that credential saying, asserting that you are the owner of this credit card number in some way?
Okay.
Is that right?
It's so.
Or is it just asserting your identity, or is it asserting that you possess a particular right?
So if we go back to the model here, let me just. I'm going to answer very generically, and then let's drill down. So the identity provider is there to provide claims about me to the relying party.
Ah, okay. So it's more than an identity provider. It's an authorization service.
No, authorization happens at the relying party.
Oh, but it's asserting things about you, not just your identity. It's
Yes.
saying you have certain rights.
No. Whether or not those rights mean anything is done at the relying party.
Oh, but it's not.
Just like driver's license.
I'm not. I'm just trying to find out the answer to the question. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad.
Well, I don't like the word rights. All it does is spit out attribute value claims, attribute value pairs that we call
Or
claims.
just identity.
What is identity in your mind?
What is identity?
Yeah, what is identity?
I mean, it could be. I would suspect that there are things which you could fit into this which I wouldn't regard as identity, and probably people will start using them for things which aren't identity.
None of these words have precise meanings.
No, I know, but informally I know roughly what I mean by an identity.
Well, stick with attribute value claims. That's what he's actually implementing.
Okay, but
And it's up to you to interpret them.
that's a much more general notion than I would expect from an identity provider.
But that's the notion you're getting.
Okay, but that's not the notion we're getting from, say, other notions of an identity service.
It's the same thing used in SAML and Liberty and X509.
It's being built into this WS star protocol.
It's hinged on this notion of claims-based identity, and it's the way that SAML works. It's the way that Liberty works. It's the way that X509 works. It's the way that Kerberos works, right?
Actually, I wouldn't regard X509 is not just about identity. X509 is about attributes.
Are you complaining that you don't like the word identity in that box?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take that as said.
How would I change that to claim provider? Here we go.
Identity/claim
Watch this.
It then means it's doing something.
Don't do it.
Okay.
Are you happy now?
We now have the impact of TCAAB for today.
But literally, it is a claim provider. So let's look at the various claims that we expect could come out of the claim provider. Okay, so Microsoft might have a claim provider that will say things about me as in my relationship with Microsoft. I'm a full-time employee. I'm a director. You know, I work in Windows. I have this employee ID number. There's various things that Microsoft could claim about me that some relying party may or may not find useful. It would depend on the particular agreement between Microsoft and that relying party. The government could make claims about me. For example, I'm over 21. That's a kind of claim. Or that my legal address is blah. Or that I was born on date blah. Or that my sex is blah. Right? So those are sort of things that a government type provider or any other kind of provider, a Visa could say that I'm a client in good standing. You know, an airline could say that I have this membership with their mileage, with their mileage plan, so that I could then use that with a rent-a-car program or something like that, or when I make a booking with an online hotel site or something like that. So it's the different kinds of relationships that I already have today that, in many cases, are reified in terms of cards in my wallet. You know, this says that I have I have an account with Discover. It has this, this account number, and it expires on this date. So those are claims that Discover is making about me, and then that get back verified when I actually use the card. So the claim could be from Visa that I'm a client in good standing. They might have some other things they can say about me. They might not. And they might be able to say something like, and this person's account number for this transaction is blah. And it could be one of those one-time account numbers, for example. And it just comes in the security token and lands at the provider. So those are the sort of things that could be coming out of that box.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have to say this is a rare treat because we don't usually get to this level of the conversation with a typical audience. So I wish Kim was here. He sends his regards. He's in Toronto, and it's very hot apparently. And
Now
he's
you know why he's not here.
yeah. No. Oh my God, the TCAAB's coming. Yeah. No.
Is it hotter here?
Yeah, it's very hot in this room. But he does send his regards. He really enjoyed the first conversation he had with you. When was that? Back in April or so, March. That was one of the very first conversations that we had that led up to the discussions we started in the industry around the laws of identity and the identity metasystem. So we appreciated your feedback then. We appreciate it now.
Well, your sex may be flawed, but the group isn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you change host?
Host.